Welcome, everybody. This is the second talk in a series called Dialogos, where we're exploring the Dominican pillars. So there are 4 Dominican pillars: prayer, study, community, and then the one that we're exploring tonight is ministry. So specifically, spirituality and service to the homeless. But before we get started, as is our custom, I'd like to have a complete minute of silence just to let the day go and let the dust settle and come into a sense of sacred presence together. So I'll time this starting now. Okay, amen. Thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Matt Branstetter. I'm the chair of the Philosophy and Religious Studies department here. And I've got some of my heroes up on stage today. Some of you also know there's a class, Homelessness and Issues of Faith, that we offer here at Catharine College. And these are some of the people on stage who help to expand our students' horizons and just give them a really honest look at poverty and the issues around poverty. So I've actually asked them to introduce themselves in a more extended way by talking about their ministry and also their process, because this work, the institutions are important, but I'm finding that what really drives it is people and the concern that people have for one another. So I want them to talk about their process too. Their emotions, their struggles, all of that. So I'll begin with my far left, Ginny Ramsey. I've heard more than once Ginny called the Mother Teresa of Lexington. She has been involved, at least since the year 2000, very directly working with homelessness and the issues of homelessness. So she's the co-founder of the Catholic Action Center in Lexington. And I believe she started with one meal. That's Mother Teresa's advice, right? Just start with one and see what happens. And millions have been served since that time. So Barry McGuffin, also, some of you guys know. He's been to St. Catherine before. Barry McGuffin, the executive director of Bethany Haven in Bardstown. So a lot of people don't know. The most common thing that I hear, and probably you too, when I hear about the executive director of the homeless shelter in Bardstown is, I had no idea we had a homeless shelter in Bardstown. Well, we do, and we'll get to learn more about it this evening. And then finally, Michael Whiting. He's involved with Catholic Charities in Louisville. He leads social justice retreats. That's the goal of these retreats, is to show people the real issues of poverty and how it affects urban life. So let's give them a hand, please. We've got a loose format, so we're just going to start. They're going to introduce themselves and kind of have the mic for a minute. Then after that, we'll take a short break. We'll come back. They'll begin a dialogue with one another, and then we'll open that up to the audience. So this will be an interactive evening, and I think we're going to start with Michael Whiting. So thank you, guys.
do have some prepared remarks. So if I lose a page, would somebody bring it back to me if it falls off the stage?
That's what I'm here for.
Okay. How about this? Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Little old lady.
Little old lady or good one?
Little old lady.
Little old lady?
So there's no echo, and there's good there's very good acoustics, so I feel totally confident up here. I'm going to give it a shot. I don't know how ironic or even acceptable it is to give a knock-knock joke on the subject of homelessness, but it's been done. I will tell you once way that Matt knows this about me, that we could switch this title and say homelessness and spirituality. We could the dynamic tension between the two, but I definitely prefer spirituality as a subject more than homelessness, which is a word I don't even like. First of all, the spiritual component, if I may. It's a key to our discussions here, and I hope you agree that's the basis. And this is a quote from Scripture. It says, and see if you can figure out where Scripture comes from. Do y'all study Scripture here? Sure. Again, the next day, John stood with 2 disciples, and looking upon Jesus as he walked, and he saith, Behold the Lamb of God. And the 2 disciples heard him speak this, and they thus followed Jesus. And Jesus turned and saw them following, and he saith unto them, What seek ye? What are you looking for? And they say unto him, Rabbi, where dwellest thou? And does anybody know where that's from? Gospel of John. Barry's got it. And it's chapter 1, verses 35 to 38. And you know what? It can be a very mundane question or a very spiritual question. And I'd like you to figure out if it's both at the same time. Jewish spirituality is not based on poverty. So I think it has a lot to do with what do you got going for yourself? Are you safe enough to have a conversation? Can we go somewhere and talk? But if some personal stories about me, I'd like to go back in time, 55 years ago, when I was 5 years old, and I was abruptly startled from sleep by the sound of sirens. And just sat up jolted, and it sounded like the sound was coming right from my nightstand. And I looked around, and red lights are dancing on the walls, ceiling, and my mother rushes us all out of the house into the street. And when we get there, we look down the street, and obviously there's a fire 2 doors down. Angry flames just gushing out of the windows. And the stricken family is just standing on the sidewalk in their pajamas. And there's a palpable sense of fear and urgency there. And unbeknownst to anyone, the 12-year-old daughter, the eldest child, went back into the house to look for her dog. When my father heard this, he ran into the house. My mother gasped, and there was a shriek, actually, and there was a gasp from the crowd. He disappeared into the house, was pushed back by the heat, smoke, and flame, and stood there, crying, feeling helpless, and the fire continued to turn the house into a charred, I guess you would say, violated container. At the meantime, this is pre-dawn, the sun is rising on a new day, and a man out of the corner of my eye is running down the street, jumps off the city bus. He's in some kind of a uniform. He comes and he throws his lunchbox there. It looks like he's a night watchman. He's the dad. He's the man who lives here in this house. Frantic, frozen, screaming. And in the soft rays of the light, I can see his face. And that face haunts me to this day. That has got to be the face of war. That has got to be the face of no control. That's got to be the face of not only are we homeless, but we have to put a human body into the ground in a few days. That's definitely something that doesn't leave me. Life is often heartbreaking and cruel. And then something really happened. There was a strange twist. We lived 3 days. Yes,
Your voice goes up and down.
thanks for telling
Make it
me.
louder. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll try it. Thanks. Thanks for saying that. I'm going to try again.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you. So I just said that there was this dramatic event, and it was a fire of our neighbors, and the child died in the fire. There was a rescue attempt. It was futile. So what happened was that a couple of days later, we're looking at the flames. Kids come and look, and it's an amazing sight. Family's gone. They never came back. But then a weird thing happened. Our house and the house adjacent to us, and then the house they caught on fire, were told to move because it's slated for demolition. And we did, first of all, this family didn't do anything wrong. They didn't know about it, but our house was perfectly fine. And then we moved across the street, and I got to see 3 houses demolished. And I learned how parking lots are made. And I want to tell you what I learned about that. Parking lots are boring. Very, very boring. It was a ridiculous thing to lose a house to build a parking lot. I'm not the only one that this has happened to, but in your young life, when you have a perfectly beautiful house, and then people are parking cars on what used to be your property, it's a sad, desolate feeling. It was weird. So anyway, I want to tell you that from that 5-year-old, jump ahead 18 years, and now I'm working in a state hospital. I just graduated high school. And one of the weirdest things in the state hospital was that I had to accompany a social worker to take patients who were in the state hospital system at that time, for sometimes college age, maybe they had a schizophrenic episode, major depression, whatever happens to the mind, consigned to a state hospital, sometimes for the rest of their life. But at this time, in the late 70s, the push is, if they're not dangerous to themselves or others, they have to go. So we were told this was good work. So I go and I make these visits to people in the in these mini homes, boarding homes, actually whatever would take these people, and make sure, number one, they got their medicine and they made their therapy appointments, whatever. It's kind of like a regional network of care for people who have been hidden away from society for all their lives. Sounds like a good idea. I hated it. Because it looked like these people were being betrayed. And then I quit that job, and this deinstitutionalization model, which was my job, and I moved to St. Louis and began inner city ministry there for 2 years, almost 2 years. When I came, and that city of St. Louis is extremely beautiful. Have anybody been? Has anybody been to City Museum? Go. If you never go there, just look at the city. For me to live on my own, at that time of my life, I wasn't even 20. And then to be in a city that's that big was amazing because magnificent fountains, parks, all kinds of architecture, French influence. It was extremely beautiful. But you know what I found out? People were looking down on the city as not a great place to live. They had already made a decision that the city was for losers. It may have been good, acceptable in the daytime if you had a job there, but if you lived downtown, you were definitely one of the dispossessed, and that was a strange feeling. I know how we use expressions like the wrong side of the tracks, the sticks, the boonies, the concrete jungle, whatever. We use them freely, and I never got used to that expression because it was an extremely wonderful city and a great place to live. When I returned to Louisville, I eventually discovered that the majority of the people I had placed or helped place, that the state had farmed out to people in society, had been housed now in private for-profit ghettos. Okay? And, or they had become street people. Or they were missing or dead. And so I became an activities director in a personal care home, and for all intents and purposes, this was a psychiatric hotel. It was a psychiatric hotel. People could come and go as they want, and the neighborhood was mistreating the people, the staff was mistreating the people. This was strictly, give these people the bare minimum, and we'll skim the rest off for ourselves. If it wasn't for me being in that program, and a lot of help with pet therapy and a lot of excursions, they would have been closed right away. I was there for 3 years. So anyway, I decided that I felt bad for abandoning these people, and I took that job. But what I guess I want to talk about what happened to me as a process, which Matt alluded to, is I have found out over time that there's really no housing problem. There's a problem of being willing to house people. If you look at satellite maps, you're not going to put a light generally where nothing is. There's buildings crying, looking back at us, saying, what are you going to do with us? There are millions and millions and millions of vacant buildings where people are not allowed to live. It is better for them to be on the street and to hide themselves, crawl under a rock maybe, if I could be so cruel to say that, just don't let us see us. When I went to London, I was downtown at the train station. I said, this is a major city. Why is there no people panhandling or homeless people? And they said, oh, they cured that problem by taking out all the benches. You see what I mean? How cynical we can get? It's a very cynical thing. Don't let anybody say, everybody, if you're homeless, chronically homeless, the thing is, what are you doing here? Please keep moving. Please keep moving. So homelessness becomes a full-time job of utter exhaustion, not to get caught on place that somebody doesn't want you to be. It's a very, very strange world we live in, and this is an old story. This is a very old story. And if we're all God's children, which is what our scripture tells us to believe, then this is child abuse. This is systematic child abuse. And how many people in here study sociology? Anybody have studied it? Okay, well, gentlemen. Society is for a reason. It's not supposed to be a cutthroat society where it's the Hunger Games. This is actually where people are moving more to the cities. I'm a city boy, and people are moving more to the city because there's a better chance to, hey, would you help me? You get rejected, 100 times, 99 times, and the 100th one, you might get something. You don't walk up to a tree and say, would you please help me out? I need $5. You take your chances with people and get dirty looks, and you may even get abused. I mean, it's extremely, you take your chances, but there's better odds, is what I'm saying. So the idea of homelessness, there's 1 billion squatters in the world. They have their own organization. The squatters have their own organization. In fact, they make good neighbors. In some countries, if you're a squatter, you're taking care of the property so it doesn't burn down and burn their house down. You're actually doing something to the neighborhood. People are extremely inventive. We don't give credit to people being creative, resourceful. If they don't have X, Y, Z money, car, status, then they're a pariah. And we don't look at them as an asset to the community. It's very unfair. So when I lead retreats with Catholic Charities, I talk a lot about statistics. I don't know if you guys do. And the statistics are useful as a springboard for conversation. Maybe we'll get to that today. But, it was Joseph Stalin that said, reputedly, that if one person is murdered, it's a tragedy. But if 1 million people are murdered, it's simply statistics. And that's the problem. We have too many people who are homeless for no good reason. No good reason. It's starting to change. Young people are saying, why is this happening? People in government are saying, I've come here to change, your story is interesting me because you had a revelation process-wise, and you couldn't accept things as they were. So this is all hopeful signs. I actually would like you to recommend a movie to you. Maybe you could play it on your campus. It's called Inside Job. It was directed by Charles Ferguson. Have you ever seen it? Anybody? It's subtitled The Movie That Took $2 Trillion to Make. $2 trillion to make. It's very, very facetious. It's about the economic crisis and how it was manufactured and what was the things that led to it. So here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to quote an economist, and this man is Andrew Lowe from MIT. He said, many of us like to think of financial economics as a science, but complex events like the financial crisis suggest that this is conceit. This conceit may be more wishful thinking, actually, than reality. During periods of extreme fear or greed, we don't have the proper balance between those to generate market efficiency, and you get extremes in behavior. Well, let me tell you something, folks. Is there a normal fear and greed? Would you tell me where the parameters are? Maybe we can talk about that. And then I'd like to say that this economist has just issued one of the biggest understatements of all time, in my word. And so I'd like to give you a story, a thumbnail sketch from a writer named Eknath Schwarn, and he's talking in his book, Words to Live By. In a Bollywood movie that I saw recently, a villager leaves home for the first time to travel to the city of Bombay. When he returns, his family and friends crowd around him, asking what it was like in the big city. His laconic reply sums up our era. Such tall buildings and such small people. If we were asked to give an account of our society's achievements, we could claim many technological developments and discoveries, plenty of skyscrapers, and the amassment of huge sums of money. But very, very few truly secure, truly wise, truly great men and women. And it is not for lack of energy or ability, though. It is because we lack a noble goal. To grow to our full height, we need to be challenged with tasks that draw out our deeper resources, the talents and resources we didn't know we had. We need to be faced with obstacles that cannot be easily surmounted unless we summon up all of our daring and creativity. This kind of challenge is familiar to any great athlete or scientist or artist. No worthwhile accomplishment comes easily. So, I'm coming to the end of my beginner remarks. Let's get back to that question asked to Jesus, that mundane question by these two men in the Gospel of John. Where do you dwell? The best, like water, benefit all and do not compete. They dwell in lowly spots that everyone else scorns. Putting others before themselves, they find themselves in the foremost place and come very near to the Tao. In their dwelling, they love the earth. In their heart, they love what is deep. In personal relationships, they love kindness. In their words, they love truth. In the world, they love peace. In personal affairs, they love what is right. In action, they love choosing the right time. It is because they do not compete with others that they are beyond the reproach of the world. So I ask me, where do we dwell? Where do you dwell? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Barry McGuffin, and I'm the director for Bethany Haven, which is a transitional homeless shelter located in Bardstown, Kentucky. And if you're from Bardstown, that might be a surprise to you that we even have a homeless shelter. In fact, Bethany Haven has been around since 1997, but very few people are even aware of it. I became the executive director in 2013, and even 5 years ago, if you'd asked or even suggested that I would be running a homeless shelter, I would have not even begun to understand what you're talking about, because my education has nothing whatsoever to do with social services. In fact, I have a Bachelor of Science in Physics. And I spent almost 18 years as a software engineer. And so my process toward ministry was gradual. I grew up in church, and my dad was a deacon at a Baptist church in Hardin County. And so, kind of following in his footsteps, I was ordained as a deacon at Mill Creek Baptist Church in Nelson County in the year 2000. And so, through the course of ministry as a deacon, I found myself in situations where I began to give biblical counsel. And in 2007, we helped plant a small church in Bardstown. 2008, I was ordained as a minister of the gospel, and my calling was pastoral counseling, and helping people understand their heart. And so that was my passion, was helping people just understand why are they feeling the way they're feeling. And so in 2011, I answered the call that God had placed on my life to full-time vocational ministry, although the vocational part didn't actually come until later. I left my job as a software engineer to go to the seminary in Louisville. And so I spent 3 semesters at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and was also volunteering at the New Life Center in Bardstown all through that time. The New Life Center is a family resource center that teaches parenting classes, primarily to low-income people. And their goal is to share the love of God and teach good parenting techniques and provide diapers and baby clothes and furniture to people. But the clients are get to earn those things by taking classes and chatting with mentors. And so I was privileged to be a mentor, and I still do that from time to time now. In 2013, I started to have kind of daydreams, and I think everybody kind of does this. What would you do if you won the Publishers Clearinghouse? And I started thinking, I'd build a homeless shelter. And I started to have these plans. I was like, yeah, build it like this. Of course, as being an engineer, I started to draw out things. This is what it would look like. And then, not really thinking anything about that, one day, one of my very best friends who happens to serve on the board, Bethany Haven, called me and said, hey, would you like to run a homeless shelter? And I said, yes, I would. Give me a minute to think about it, though. So I became the very first executive director for Bethany Haven, which is part of the reason why so few people in Nelson County know about it, because we have a wonderful board of directors who are all volunteers and all very busy in the things that they do. And of course, that's the thing about boards for charities, is the people that serve on the boards for charities are really, really busy people, and they're dedicated. And so we have a wonderful board of directors. We have a fantastic caretaker who lives in our shelter, but there was no one in the middle. So when I say I'm the executive director, it means I'm the one who executes the will of the board of directors. And so I'm the PR man and the caseworker, and sometimes I do a little bit of maintenance, and sometimes I go pick up food. And sometimes I'm just listening to residents, because in all that time that God was preparing me to do pastoral counseling, I didn't know that I'd be sitting across the desk from somebody. In many cases, when they come through that door of our shelter, it's the worst day of their life. Over and over again, I hear people say, I can't believe it's come to this. I never thought I would have to ask for help like this. They're embarrassed, they're mortified to be in this position. Bethany Haven serves single women and families, and so we primarily skew very heavily towards the ladies. In fact, the average guest in our shelter is a 34-year-old single mom, on average. And so she is there because she has nowhere else that she can afford to go. She has no family that can take her in. She has no ability to pay for even a motel room. And very often, there will be some kids with her, and she doesn't know where she's going to sleep tonight. She may have, if she's lucky enough to have a car, everything she owns is probably in the car with her. And so the stereotype of the old hobo sleeping under a bridge is not our typical resident. But I have had people that slept in the woods that ended up coming to the shelter. I have had people that slept in their cars before they came to the shelter. And I've had people that have come to us because the motel that they were staying in, they've run out of any kind of funding that they had left over. They've exhausted the resources from St. Vincent de Paul that they could get. So they have no more nights left at the motel, and they do not know where they're going to sleep. And so they end up coming to Bethany Haven, and at Bethany Haven, I want to stress the transitional nature of the shelter, because the goal is not simply to get somebody in out of the rain. The goal is to enact a life change that will enable them to take care of themselves. And so that's really where the ministry part comes in, because once again, I'm going to the heart. How did you get here, and what can we do to help you get where you want to be? In many cases, this is an identity issue. You know, they think, well, I've been told I'm worthless all my life. I don't seem to be able to get anywhere in life. Well, no, you're not worthless. In fact, you're made in the image of God. That gives you infinite value. So let me help you see that. So it could be something as simple as figuring out, okay, well, let's work on getting a GED. Let's look in the newspaper and find a job. Let's try to get daycare arranged. Let's go get a food box and get plugged into the little community that's here in the shelter. The shelter, and I love giving tours, so if anybody's ever in Bardstown and wants to take a tour of Bethany Haven, I'd love to show you the place. It's kind of like a fraternity house or a sorority house in a way, because it's a converted duplex, and there are 7 bedrooms in our shelter. Each resident family gets 1 bedroom, which means sometimes I've got a mom and 2 kids sharing 1 bedroom, which really would be a really nice size for 1 person. We put 3 in, sometimes 4, if we can squeeze them in. And they share the kitchen, they share the living room, and that's kind of where the community is built, is around the kitchen table, which is kind of nice. I like that. I want to encourage the residents to join together, because probably, and I've asked our residents how they felt before they came to us. The number one thing I hear over and over again is they feel alone. They're abandoned and even betrayed. And so I want to stress to them, you're not alone. In fact, I'll share statistics with the residents coming in. And you're like, really? You bore them with statistics coming in? Yes, because I have a point. I want to prove to them that Bethany Haven, we serve about 52 people a year. And that means we serve 52 people a year, so you're not alone. You're not weird. You're not defective. This is actually something I deal with every day. So that's one way I like to encourage people to come in. Now, Matt said that we should talk about how we feel. Well, this is definitely a calling on my life. And actually, just today, I was talking with somebody else, and they said, how do you handle the ones that just kind of go off? And I said, I can't focus on them. It's kind of like, you may have heard the story about the man throwing starfish back into the ocean on the beach. And somebody says, why are you doing that? There's millions of starfish on this beach. What good are you doing? He says, well, I can't help them, but this one I can help. This one I can help. Well, we're helping about 52 people a year. And so out of those 52, we have a little better than 50% success rate. So we can make, I hope, a significant impact on the lives of 28 people a year. I figured out how many day room we provided. So with 7 bedrooms, we averaged 6.5 out of 7 bedrooms full every day, 2014. We provided 2,365 room nights on a budget of about $44,000. So we're providing food and case management and shelter for $19 a day per room. It's pretty good. So, right now, one of our biggest needs is we need emergency shelter in Nelson County. There's really nothing right now for that. And so I'm driven by a passion, I guess, to try to help as much as possible and see if we can get more starfish tossed back into the sea, to stick with that metaphor. Ultimately, I'd like to even expand the back end of our ministry to have a phase 2 for transition, where residents might even be able to pay some rent, so we could ease them even more gently back into society. And that's really kind of what's driving this, is to help the residents understand that their identity is not as a homeless person. It's not who they are. That's their status. They're homeless. Let's fix that. But that's not who you are. That's the state you happen to be in. So identity is really a key thing for me. I'm constantly kind of going on about that. But understand who you are. And so the thing that kind of drives me for this is we do have a little bit better than 50% success rate, and I can celebrate with somebody who says, I just got a new apartment. And they say, can you come pray in it? Absolutely. I love doing that. It's one of my favorite parts of the job is somebody says, I just got an apartment. Would you come pray over it? Yeah. How much do I have to pay you to be able to do that? So that's what really drives me, is the joy of being able to see somebody say, you know what, I was sleeping in my car, and now I got a job, I'm saving money, I've got an apartment. They're feeling their identity, and so that's really kind of what drives me, and kind of my journey to get there. It took a while. I was 40 years old before I stepped into full-time ministry. But this is where God's led me, so I'm very grateful for that. So I'll pass the mic.
Yeah. Well, I'm Ginny Ramsey, and can you hear me? Am I getting through? Okay, normally I don't need one of these because I do speak loud and clear. Interesting things. Thank you all for your sharing, and particularly for the personal sharing. Listening to you all changed my normal speech, which Matt will laugh because he's heard it 100 times, right, Matt? Because I always like to start off by sharing with people what the charism is of the Catholic Action Center. I'm going to stop here, though, and say one thing that to me is most important. I came down here from Lexington today, and I'm doing it in honor of Mary Renault, who loved the Dominican sisters. She was a great friend who passed away, it's been about 10 days ago, and she left in her will that she wanted all donations, anyone who wanted to recognize her, to give to the sisters in Springfield. Years ago, I brought folks from Christ the King so that we could talk about these 4 pillars of your congregation. And, it's the 4 pillars of our faith. Let's be honest, if we're all going to stand up and call ourselves Catholic Christians, or not, God bless you, I don't mean everybody has to be, but if you are, then you all set the tone. You all are the example. So in honor of Mary and her love of you all, both Mary Renault and the Blessed Mother, but particularly Mary Renault, I want to say thank you for what you meant to her, because she was a wonderful woman who looked up to you all with such great passion for what you do. But yeah, oh Lord, you know, everything I was listening to you all say kept making me think of John Powell, the Jesuits saying. He had if I could only remember all of it, I've got more gray hairs than I like to admit. I used to know this quote totally, but he said that there comes a time in our life, when we say, oh, now I see, aha. That's why I lived through that experience. That's why I went through that education. That's why my life journey has been what it is. Even though at the time it didn't make sense, and at the time I may not have enjoyed it. But then you wake up and realize that, oh, he was preparing me for what I need to do to build his kingdom. And when you get to that place, whether you're a little bit older than this guy was when I did, when you realize this is what I'm supposed to be doing, you don't have a choice. You do not have a choice. I have the greatest respect for all folks who at age 20 or age 25 or age 30 come to that realization of who they are and what they need to give to our world, or what the world will be giving to them. In my case, I was a tax accountant. And I went to Catharine College and went into accounting because I was, I'm a kid of the 60s. I was in college in the 60s. We were not only celebrating lots of things, but protesting lots of things. And one of the things we protested was war. And in fact, I was honored to be with some of the Ursuline nuns and some of our Jesuit priests in Memphis with Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, there are so many things that the Catholic social teachings impacted me at a younger age that I didn't know it at the time, but there it was. But I wanted to be a tax accountant because back in those days, women weren't. You were going to be a secretary, you were going to be a teacher, you were going to be a wife. And I came from a very wealthy background where I was expected to go on and, be the debutante and do the normal things. There were 8 kids. I was number 7, and my mother said, my goodness, Jenny, what happened? It unraveled by the time we got there. Instead of going to a debutante summer, I wanted to go on peace marches in the South, and it really did kind of worry them. I thought it was great. But so that was part of it, but then things changed. I did find the love of my life. We did get married. We had children. And life gets pretty busy with them. And I became a practicing tax accountant. Part-time at the beginning because I wasn't going to leave those kids. I wasn't going to leave my babies all day. And then became full-time in my career. Did a darn good job. Enjoyed it. Loved the people. And loved to be able to help people find the least amount of taxes so that less money was going toward war efforts. I mean, that honestly was the reason at the beginning, not just to be a woman in a different field, but to be able to say, how can you make a change? You can make a change by being as responsible as taxpayers as we can. So that went on. And then one day, and it truly was one day, and we got our Louisville friend here. You may not, as you see, I have my shirt about the University of Kentucky basketball on. But one day, I grew up with UK basketball, and we always had season tickets. And one day, walking into Rupp Arena, when it was fairly new, I started noticing all these people, who were kind of hanging around. And in Lexington, Kentucky, sad to say, at least in 2015, we have 1,724 homeless people experiencing homelessness that are our official count. Back then, it was just as many, they were just hidden. Rupp Arena, any social activity, any place downtown, would always draw those folks who were looking for, hopefully, some help, or at least a handout, or whatever you want to call it, but they were there. They were part of the celebration. Never did I see them that much, though. So I went to speak to our Commissioner of Social Services, who at the time was Barbara Curry. We had a wonderful female mayor, Pam Miller, and I said, what are all these people? What is this going on? Something I've not noticed before. And so we started the discussion, and that was in 1994, I believe, because that's when the U.S. government started the Welfare to Work program. President Clinton called it something else. I forget the name of it right now. I can't believe I have. But anyway, long and short of that story is that's how he balanced our budget. Between that and taking disability away from people who were chronic, who were addicts, and people with alcohol and drugs problems, there was such a shift in a lot of what people felt like were entitlement programs.
Welfare to work.
Welfare to work, but there's another name of it. It's not just welfare to work. They have the big title. But anyway, so our mayor said to me, Jenny, you're interested in those people? And I said, well, no, I just wanted to know what you're doing about them. And she said, well, why don't you do something? We're going to start something here in Lexington that's not been done anywhere in the country. We are in the midst of this welfare to work process. And as a community, we can write our own plan. If we so desire, we can write the plan. Instead of taking the money from Washington through Frankfurt, so much for transportation, so much for education, so much for this and that, we can say, what do we need in Lexington? And she said the thing that's always impressed her was that we have so many people in our churches that do so many outreach activities that if we only coordinated them, we could end up utilizing the dollars from this welfare to work the best way for Fayette County. So, I left one thing out. I left the Catholic Church for 17 years before that. Okay, not that 17 years. I'd come back about 4 years before this conversation with our mayor. As a child of the 60s and as one who looked and said, oh my goodness, they're just talking, there's nothing real. My husband and I had made the decision, we just didn't want anything to do with that church. So spirituality started pulling both of us back though. We started realizing that we're more human if we recognize the fact that there's more to us than just being professionals, being parents, going to soccer games, going to swim, taking our daughter to her swim meets. And we started looking at different faith communities. From the Lutherans to the Unitarians we spent time and got to know lots of people in these different groups and would go worship with them. But bottom line, when you're born a Catholic, you're a Catholic. And the charism of the Catholic Church was the thing that pulled us back when we took the time to go back to the church and hear, this is how God works. That Sunday, Father Dan Knoll, I always blame him for this, or give him credit. Father Dan Knoll was talking about the Catholic social teachings, something that we did not talk about in the 60s. They were living it, there was a lot of living of it, but there wasn't the discussion about these are the pillars on which our faith, is in action. So anyway, I come back to the church and was active in Christ the King, and so that's why the mayor said, we need to get these churches together, and I want to appoint you the head of a faith and community task force. Let's find out what faith community's doing, let's pull it together, and that can help those people you're seeing hanging around Rupp Arena and hanging around the streets. So I said, okay, sounds like a challenge. I was just naive enough to think a white Catholic woman in Lexington, Kentucky could pull together 421 communities of faith. Doesn't matter where you are, there's always that stress and that strain, but we have a lot of ethnic churches in Lexington. We have a lot of things as far as, I always have thought Louisville is more open to the Catholic faith because there are a lot more Catholics. We got 43,000 in our whole diocese. In Lexington, we always were more in the minority, even though we have 7 parishes. And guess what? We ended up with 267 communities of faith coming together. They came together, they put aside all of their theological differences, and they said, what can we all do together? We all are people of faith, whether it was our Jewish, whether it's our Islamic, our Protestant groups, our Catholics, they all came. And they sat around tables and they talked about that we are our brother's keeper and our sister's keeper. And so we were able to end up with 5 committees. Some of it gets real boring. But the one that we did, when we started it, was the Feed the Hungry program. We worked hard with the different social service agencies in Lexington to figure out where were those gaps. I said this then, I'll say this today. The hardest thing for service providers to do is to not tell you what they do, but tell you what they can't do. Who is it they have to turn away? Who is it that doesn't fit their program? Not until we can do that can we really identify gaps. And that's what we were trying to do with that group. So for 2 years, we didn't just work on it. We actually started the Feed the Hungry program. We started a mentoring program. We started a transportation program. We started what else did we do? There are 5 of them. How quickly, I forget. Anyway, I'll think of the others. But the 2 of them continue today, and that's the Feed the Hungry program and the mentoring. The transportation was always an insurance problem. And one of them was a financial literacy, which I always laugh. I laugh more now, 20 years later than I did then. It's great to talk about balancing your checkbook and making things, but when we're dealing with the poorest of the poor, they're trying to figure out how to get money. They don't have the resources. We got to take them from where they are, not from what we think would be best for them. Well, anyway, so we did this. And after several years of the Feed the Hungry program, we ended up with 128 churches that were committed to this. Keep in mind, we did all this with no money. Well, this was just absolutely fascinating. I mean, it just drew me in, and as I was learning so much about our Catholic social teachings, I came up and worked with the folks in Louisville at the Peace and Justice. I'm trying to think of the guy's name. He went to Atlanta. Oh, he's wonderful.
David Dutchke, Mark Bouchard.
David. Oh, he's wonderful. And, we started doing a few things together. And we started a Peace and Justice with our diocese, a Peace and Justice Commission. And in the meantime, I went to Christ the King and said, how on earth can we have a cathedral and not have a Peace and Justice Committee? Come on. Isn't that what we're supposed to be? So things happened that way during that time. Well, and in 1999, that's when we began the Catholic Action Center. In between, I'd gone off to D.C. The bishop wanted to get me out of town. He said at least 6 weeks a year. And he got me out of town by being on the board of the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. And I became the national chair because I was the only one that wasn't employed by a diocese. And they wanted somebody who'd speak up. And I'd speak up. So I saw the freedom within the structure of the church not to be paid bound or beholden, just part of it and loving it. But then in 1999, we started the Catholic Action Center. We brought people together because we were seeing at our Feed the Hungry program, which at that time was a service that was just a free, these different churches, certain days, feeding 200 to 300 people at a time. Just sack lunches that they could take with them, or they could have there. Some of them they could eat there, but a lot of it was simply to be sure people were getting food. We started hearing their stories. This is where the change happens. You talk about the change. The change happens when you meet the people, when you see the face, understand the story, don't care whether they qualify. It's not about qualifying, it's about hearing the story. And yes, you have to hear it with a little bit of a crooked ear, of course, because sometimes people, they want to talk about, things that may not be 100% accurate, but the truth is when you're living in poverty and suffering, God bless you. I don't care what story you tell me. I'm responsible for you, as Dorothy Day, that we base the Catholic Action Center on, realized the day that she saw the suffering of the homeless in New York City. So we did. We spent 8 months putting together the Catholic Action Center as far as what were we going to be. We had more meetings than Carter has liver pills. We had more people excited about it. They were coming and wanting to talk about it. This is what we want to do, and that's what we want to do. And then all of a sudden, one day, we all looked at each other and said, isn't this blueprint wonderful? Remember, I'm a trained accountant. I'm a tax accountant. To me, to have a budget, to have this, to have that, it's very important. The business plan, oh, no. This is a work of faith in our case. We're not an agency. We're simply people of faith. What we did is throw out all of our plans. And I don't know if any of y'all know Mary Alice Pratt. She was a wonderful social justice person from at the Newman Center in Lexington. She said, well, what do the people want at one of our meetings? And that's when we threw out our plans and said it's time to have some town hall meetings with the folks from the streets. We had 128 or 126 folks come to a cookout that we held. Remember, we're feeding them 3 or 4 times a week, so we see our folks all the time. And we said, come on, let's talk about, we want to put something together, let's talk about what you'd like it to look. What do you need? What can we do that will truly make a difference? Well, the first time we said we're having this cookout, 120 some odd folks came, and we had people with clipboards, and actually had the Community Action of Kentucky. One of the president of that was one of our volunteers, and he had them put together this phenomenal survey so that we could be doing a needs assessment of these folks. Well, you know, it'd be like going to Fayette Mall or someplace and somebody saying, here, you can have this sandwich. Now tell me, how many times have you been arrested? Tell me, what are the worst things you've done? How many times you've been in prison? How many checks have you bounced? I mean, you know, it's an intrusion into other people's privacy to start asking them what their barriers are. We all have barriers, no matter who we are. But we did that. We sat there and asked these 126 people, and, you know, they all kind of came back real vanilla, as one would say, except they all said they needed t-shirts and tennis shoes, because this was in June. And they said every one of the clothing banks of these different churches are out of t-shirts and tennis shoes. You know, what the heck? That's all we have to do? Collect a few t-shirts and tennis shoes? Well, we can do that. We said, how about you come back in 2 weeks and let's have they wanted to have another cookout. They loved it. They loved us having the cookout. So they said, we'd like another cookout, t-shirts, and tennis shoes. So we said, okay, 2 weeks, come back, we'll do it again. We met, we talked about it, we threw away those clipboards. And we said, we're going to sit down and share a meal with folks. Everyone's going to speak as human beings. And we're going to find out, I mean, they look upon us as do-gooders coming in, or will they look upon us as friends? If we're asking these questions, we're simply part of the system to them. So 218 people came to the second one because they knew there were going to be t-shirts and tennis shoes. We asked all the churches to collect them, and I tell you, we got thousands of t-shirts and about 800 pairs of tennis shoes in 2 weeks. And we had this great cookout with volleyball and round tables and not a clipboard to be found. And people sat down and talked. And they came back and they told us what they wanted. They said, you know, we're being arrested for public indecency. We need a place to use the restroom. They said, here it is in the summer, and we smell. One guy looked at me and said, I smell, and I know I smell. And you might not tell me that, but he said, I need a place to take a shower. I don't like smelling. He said, we need a place to wash our clothes. Everybody will give us clothes, but there's no place to wash them. So we wear them until they smell, and we smell, and then we throw them away. If we only had a laundromat. And they said they needed a place to have 3 meals a day. It's wonderful that we were doing all these Feed the Hungry programs. And they'd have to go from one church to the next and remember what day it was and whose place to go. But they said, oh, we'd like to know that we could go someplace every day and have something to eat. But the universal message of all 216 or 18 of those folks was they needed a place to belong. That they were being arrested for loitering wherever they went. And they just needed a place to belong. That's what we found the Catholic Action Center on. And they are our guests, not clients. Nothing clientish about them. They help run it as much as we do. Yes, there are challenges. But in Lexington, with our 1,700 plus homeless, and also with our wonderful Hope Center and our wonderful Salvation Army, those are 2 places that have taken care of a lot of our homeless. The Catholic Action Center is a place to go if you have no place else to be. We're there to fill in the gap of the social services. We don't take federal, state, local money. We're all just based on people wanting to live out of their faith, live out of their compassion, live out of their sense of community. We don't care who they are or why they're doing it, as long as they're able to respect our folks. Our Catholic Action Center gathering room, we had artists coming wanting to help, and what can we make? Well, we said we have to be surrounded by our Catholic social teachings. So an artist, to this day, it's still there, looks pretty good, our big mural of the Catholic social teachings, because that's what we're based on. We're based on the fact that Jesus said, feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty. He didn't say feed the hungry that have the right paperwork or an ID. He didn't say give drink to the thirsty that are sober. He didn't say shelter the homeless that are just trying to get a job. He just said do it. So we're the just do it ones, and the other programs, which are wonderful. In some ways we're prep school for those programs to take them to the next step. We're there to love them through it. Would be the best way I can say it. And that sounds so funky, but coming from an formerly agnostic, a tax accountant who, was in the business circles, a silver spoon kid, I can promise you, that's all there is to it. We're simply there to follow the gospel and to love the folks through it. Each individual has their own barrier, as we all do. Our folks are known to be those who have the most barriers. And we just feel blessed. We have the mentally ill who have been put out in the 70s and are still cycling around, and now P&A has come in with their big get them all out of the personal care homes. We have people who, who have just been forgotten. We feel so blessed to be there for those that are the most disenfranchised and those that are the most forgotten. Over the years, the Catholic Action Center grew from the place that we purchased with the goodness of just people. That's all we do. No federal, state, local. We just say, you want to help? Give us money. Being a tax accountant, I know how to make it so there are tax advantages for them. They did it. I went to the bishop. That was the funniest thing, is Bishop Williams. In order to use the word Catholic, you're supposed to get permission, from the bishop of the diocese, which kind of surprised me. I didn't know that. Catholic worker, Catholic this, Catholic that. So I went to Bishop Williams, though, and I said, Bishop Williams, we want to do this. And he said, I'll cut your tongue out if you don't spend time, truly discerning what's needed. He said the worst thing anybody could do would be to start this kind of ministry and then abandon the people, because nobody wanted to keep it going. So we spent 8 months on that. I knew by that time that my commitment was 100%. My husband said, Jenny, I've never seen you so full of joy. Our kids are grown. If you want to do that, do it. That was a big sacrifice on his part, because I don't get paid. In fact, it kind of costs us, but that's okay. You know, over the years it did. Now we're, you know, people take care of us when we go out begging for money. Judy McGuffin, the co-founder, and I used to laugh that if it got too bad and we couldn't keep the lights on, we go stand in the street corner because we know all the prostitutes. They're our friends. You know, they come to eat with us, so we know how to do it. But not that anybody would want us, but you know. But things have really grown. We have 20 houses now. 20 houses where people who are rejected from every place else can live and are in community. Dorothy Day said it the best. We all know the long loneliness, and the only solution is love, and love comes in community, as you sisters know so well. So we try to provide community for our folks in the sense of whether they're wandering the streets and just know they always have a place they can come. Our community inn we opened 4 years ago. It is a shelter that takes care of 103 is our average folks a night, men and women, separate, women upstairs, men downstairs. Matt comes and gives them massages, chair massages. It's so wonderful. That's dignity. You know, we believe in dignity. Because dignity is what a lot of them lack. As you said, they come in feeling that brokenness, feeling that isolation. But we're kind of the renegades of Lexington, too, I must say. Right now, we've got the Department of Justice actually just notified us they've taken our case. The city tried to take away did take away our occupancy permit for the community inn 3 years ago. And you know, when you're taking care of about 40,000 people a year for them for free, it's kind of weird. But they still did it. And HUD got involved through Fair Housing. And we were just notified that the Department of Justice has taken the case, which we weren't asking them. We didn't want them to. We just want to get it settled and then leave us alone and let us continue to minister. So we feel pretty protected. Kind of the Holy Spirit and the Department of Justice and, and the good people of Lexington. But people think we're crazy because they say, why are you doing this so long? And it's not just me. We have over 1,000 volunteers a month. Last year we had 13,800 volunteers who helped us. We have kids come in from all over the country on spring breaks. We have people come and spend their summertime. They think of, let's go to Kentucky, and they don't realize when they're coming to Lexington, you know, you always think, well, you know, you meant Eastern Kentucky, didn't you? And we say, no, we have the poor here too. 60,000 people in Lexington, Kentucky live at or below the poverty level. We have 1,700 men, women, and children who suffer from homelessness. There's plenty of poverty to go around, as much as we're very proud of our city. And we've worked hard in awareness. Part of Dorothy Day's charism as Catholic worker is to be advocates. We're advocates for our poor. We're advocates for our homeless. And I think that Mother Teresa said it best, and we try to live by this so much, because this is the hard thing in Lexington to get across to folks sometimes. But, you know, she said, if you lead with judgment, you never get to love. We were called to love, not to judge. So whoever comes through our door is accepted and is embraced, unless they get into real big trouble, you know. But, you know, it's a joy. I can't say enough. I read his questions, and, you know, spiritually, we're living the gospel. I mean, we're reminded constantly, and we know that this is not our work. It's so much bigger. So much bigger. We wouldn't have 20 houses. We wouldn't have Catholic Action Center, Community Inn. We have God's Net. I mean, we've got unbelievable amount of things that are going on for very little money, because it's not about money. It's about people. And every day, that's the challenge. The biggest challenge is always to remember that. The biggest challenge is to always look folks in the face and see the face of God right there. Because sometimes that can be tough, particularly those when you invest a lot in, as you talk about the invested, and then they end up doing the opposite. But you know, if we keep focused on the fact, and I work with our core volunteers a lot on this, if we focus on why we do what we're doing, it's easy. So that's all I got to say. I think I've overtaken my time.
Good.
So.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you all
Thank you.
three. Very inspiring. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll reconvene. They'll begin the dialogue, and then everyone else can enter in. So please just take some time, get some refreshment, but don't leave unless you just have to, because I'd love to hear from you guys, and they would too. So. They're going to start a dialogue, probably go for about 20 minutes, and then any questions from the audience. Rather than just question, answer, more since it's a small group of us, we'll just enter into the dialogue. The dialogue space will just expand out and encompass the room. So we can talk to each other as much as we can talk to the panelists, okay? So. Okay, and there's a little script there that you can follow or not.
Is it the one that says exploration questions?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And you guys, Jenny, you and Barry may have to pass the mic
Oh, that's okay.
between you a little bit. So
We can share, can't we?
Yes.
We'll share.
Can I pose this question for us? Is just generally, what's the greatest joy in your work? What I heard is a sense of fulfillment and energy from each of you. I also feel energy, even though I'm not in a direct extension of service capacity. What I feel is the greatest part of my work is it is constantly a call to conversion for myself. That's it. So that I can listen better, love more, forgive faster, and look for solutions. The people that I see who are in this situation have been given a raw deal because the priorities and values of our society are very, very unjust. Very unjust. Let me underline that. It is not an accident that people are homeless in the United States. It's deliberate. It is deliberate. There are vacant cities. There are vacant new buildings. There are tons and tons of space that can be habitable today. Tonight, not allowed to because of the criminalization of people who are in extreme need. This is what I've found. This is not an old poor person. This is a systemic problem of how we view the human race. The human race is terrible to itself. It's horrible to itself. I don't think that's a joy necessarily, but at least it keeps my eyes open. If I'm walking around and I'm thinking I'm doing a good job, and I'm not calling myself to conversion in little areas, then I'm part of the problem. So for me, that's a fulfilling thing because it allows me to be more human. That's what the greatest joy is, that I become more human. I don't have anything, I don't know much about social work. You know, I love young people. I feel young people are getting a world that the so-called, you know how they tell you young people, would you please get it together? Because you're going to have to do a lot of hard work. Well, adults have not done the hard work. In fact, they've created the problems. And so we're going to let them fix it. It's overwhelming. So I guess what I would like to say is I have a tremendous empathy and compassion for young people with their high ideas that see my generation letting them down and perpetuating these problems. It's a travesty. I'm sure Matt knows where I'm coming from, because it's when he's brought groups. I'm trying to be very open, and I put them in an emergency situation. When anybody comes to an insight retreat, they have to be in an emergency situation. Otherwise, they can stay at St. Catharine and read a chapter in a book about homelessness and discuss. But they have to be in the midst of they've been evicted, they have children, they've exhausted all the resources with family and friends, but God knows if somebody comes to you, one of your friends, and every time they see you, they say, do you have $10? You might say, I don't want to see that friend anymore. You know what I mean? And on the street, most people are going to say, if you come up to them and say, what do you need? They're going to say, you know what, I worked all my life and I got let go for no reason other than economics, and I don't have a job. They didn't do anything wrong. We have tons and tons of people who have followed the rules who are homeless. That's my beef. That's what keeps me looking for a greater joy, to tell people that it's not their fault that these problems exist. It's definitely not an addiction in the sense of somebody drinking alcohol. Percentage-wise, that's very low. The addicts are the people who are running the financial institutions who are in the midst of there's not enough money. And they've got an addiction to power and money. Anyway, I've gone on. I hope you know where I'm coming from, because it's a long story. But the greatest joy in my work is revealing what's hidden in plain sight to people who say, oh, those poor people. No, it's oh, us poor human race. What have we done in our thinking to make this problem so prevalent?
Okay, well, greatest joy for me. Well, and I've already.
Oh, I turned it off. I'm sorry.
There we go. My greatest joy, and I've already kind of alluded to this, and this is really what keeps me going, is I get to see people come to this realization of who they are, of understanding, wow, I'm not defined by my circumstance. In fact, I can change my circumstance. And so that's my great joy. Now, and that's really what I have to hang on to, is I get to see people that come to me and don't know what's going to happen next, don't know what the next step is, don't have any hope, and get to see them come into community, get to see them experience hope. And I get to be a tool in that. Personalities being what they are, and you can imagine what a house full of ladies is like sometimes. There's a little bit of territorialism.
Spoken to the comment here.
There might be some personality issues from time to time. And so we have a house meeting from time to time, and of course I have to lead these house meetings, and I think about a story, and I think this is a true story, but even if it's not, it's a really good story. I've heard that when in the American Revolution, toward the end of the war, some of the American officers were very upset with Congress because of their being paid. And so they thought, you know what, we've got the army, we've got the weapons, we should just march on Philadelphia and take over. And when General Washington heard that, he decided he had to do something. So he called all his officers together, and he goes into this meeting with his officers with papers already written up. And as he goes into the room, he excuses and says, "Excuse me, gentlemen." He puts on glasses. He says, I've given my eyesight for the country. And at that point, he doesn't even need to go on with his remarks, because every officer at that point knows, okay, we weren't just doing this for money, we were doing this for a purpose, for a reason. And so when I approach a house meeting like that, I come to them and say, I'm the chief servant here. And so I will apologize. I have failed you somehow by not doing enough for you to keep harmony here in the house. And I mean that. It's not simply a ploy, because I think General Washington had a really great idea, but I want to model that, because really the problems come about because of selfishness. So if I can help people see that we're all going to do better by being selfless, then that's a real joy. When I get to see that in action, then, okay, now I remember this is why I do what I do, is I get to see folks actually convert. They're not just looking out for themselves, where's the next dollar that I can get? But, okay, well, when I see these folks thinking, we want to cook a meal together. Great, do that. When I see residents who have cars driving other residents to the store, that's really great. When I see residents saying, hey, I think that they've got some open apartments down here, that's great. That's really my joy, is when I get to see the residents actually start to take some ownership over their own life and realize that there's more than just where they were at.
Wow, let's see. A great joy. See, I get to do a lot of different things. That's one of the great joys I've got. And I'm not executive director, by the way, Matt. I don't know why you put that on there. I am the director of the Catholic Action Center Community and GodsNet and our housing. I mean, I get the joy of writing all the checks and collecting, begging for donations and doing all that, along with lots of other people helping as far as spreading the good news. I get great joy from going to schools. And, I think what most eye-opening was about 8 years ago, we led a retreat for the University of Kentucky, their residential life staff. Residential life staff means those in charge of all the dorms, and also the Greek organizations. And there were probably 180 young folks, along with paid, the UK staff that weren't as young. But their whole eye-opening experience, the immersion that we had them be part of with our folks, to see them all of a sudden have their aha moment over the fact that we're all in this together. I always say things to our volunteers and during training, things like, we don't ask you for your pocketbook for a reason. We want you to come and share time with our people. Because once you do that, your heart will open, your mind, your thoughts will change about who's at fault, and we've got you. We'll get you checked then. We don't have to go after money. So when we celebrated a 10-year anniversary of the Catholic Action Center, in fact, we came here and did the play. Instead of we had people who wanted to sponsor at the Hyatt Regency a big dinner and just invite everybody. And we said, come on, that's not who we are. We'd have to invite all of our folks, to come for free. I mean, you're not going to have a $100 a plate dinner for the Catholic Action Center. I mean, doesn't make sense. We have served 5 million meals, all donated food. We don't buy food. It's all from the community. And, I looked at him and I said, let's think of something else. So our folks wrote the play, Please Don't Call Me Homeless, I Don't Call You Homed. They came up with the title and they told their story. And we did it here. I don't know if any of you all were here to see it. Yes. And you know how real our folks were. They were telling, their story. Well, they ended up doing it for over 32,000 people across Kentucky. The schools, even in Louisville, because Bellarmine we did it, because what's the name of that group? The Governor's Scholars Program. They had us do it for them for 2 years. We don't do it anymore. I mean, we're not a production company. But seeing that happen, you talk about joy. It was amazing. People knowing that they count. I think that if I had to say one thing with this answer, I can't answer one word, but if I had to, I would say when the person comes into the Catholic Action Center and we say welcome, and they go, oh, thank God, I can be somewhere. when they realize that we truly accept them as who they are, not where we want them to be. So I think that's the biggest thing, and I get to do that every day. I mean, it's quite amazing. So they're seeing the change, seeing folks taking, understanding that our people, as we call them, our guests, the people we love, the people that are part of our community of the Catholic Action Center count, and that they've got a voice, as well as the first time they come to us and realize after they've been turned away so many places that we're really serious. We accept them for who they are with all the barriers and all the brokenness. So I'd say that's it. What's our next one?
You mind if I still read? Is
Oh,
that
yeah.
okay?
Yeah, why don't you?
Why does the issue of homelessness make some feel uncomfortable? What are some of the psychological and social factors at work in this discomfort? Why aren't more people involved in the service to the homeless? Well, has anybody ever seen anybody sleeping at a bus stop? Did you kind of like do a double take? Be honest. Yeah, right? Well, you're not supposed to sleep at bus stops. You can, I mean, it's your prerogative, it's a free world. But the fact of the matter is that people, in my opinion, they see themselves in a, well, I have 4 children. I used to go in and look at them sleeping. It was the most angelic, my kids are very active. But they looked like angels when they were sleeping, in weird postures too. And they had the brain turned off and there was no ego. But if you see somebody in private like that, you think they need enclosure just for safety. And so it can remind you of somebody who's kind of like vulnerable to being killed or somebody who's already dead. I mean, when you fall asleep, you could be looking like you're dead. You know. So to do that in public is a shock to our recognition because we know what death is. We've seen it, and it's death. And there's, nothing looks more dead than somebody who's dead. Why do the dead look more dead? Anyway, so some of the things that I think make people feel uncomfortable is the extreme vulnerability involved. And because if you know how demoralizing or dehumanizing it is when you are in an extreme vulnerable state, and every time you're with somebody who doesn't have the proper enclosure, go to the bathroom, change their clothes, brush their teeth, sleep. It's different, and so I would say that some of the psychological factors are that also. This is a country that prides people on having their stuff. If you ever go on YouTube, you can look up George Carlin. There's curse words in it. But he talks about people with their stuff, and he flies across. And he sees houses, and houses are just little places where people have their stuff, and how your stuff is your stuff is junk, but my stuff is really stuff. And he's got a great wordplay. But we're taught in this society to acquire for status. And if you see somebody holding bags with their worldly possessions, you're thinking, well, where are you going to put your stuff, man or woman? It's.
No, I want to say this. That I disagree. I know you're speaking on a certain level. I'm on the ground level. I want to say people feel guilty. Guilt is one of the biggest factors that makes people be the issue of homelessness, make people uncomfortable. Because the bottom line is, here in the United States of America, we all have our stuff. We all think if you do this, this, and this, you're going to get here. We all know you go to A, B, C. Mm-hmm. That's not true for these folks. And nobody wants to hear that. Because that means the system is broken. They're afraid to admit what you're explaining. That it's broken. That everyone doesn't have justice offered. And the other thing is, if you all remember our folks who came for Please Don't Call Me Homeless, I Don't Call You Home. You remember Ellis? Ellis looked homeless. He was the one with the all scraggly hair. He's an African American. Another thing has to do with that prejudice. The prejudice if somebody is all scraggly or if they don't smell good or whatever, there's something to be feared. And then the third thing is, because so many of our homeless are mentally ill, and they like to talk to the birds, and they like to sleep in the bus stop, they don't want to be inside, that it's fear. You know, it's fear and guilt. That's what I have experienced, and I have experienced a lot of it in Lexington, because we have those that aren't just what we call the sanitized homeless, those who are really trying to move. We have those that are chronic. Louisville's done a wonderful job. You all really took it on. You're down to 87 chronically homeless, when Lexington is still sitting there at 15 times what you are.
Well, that's not necessarily true, because we have 10,000 families on the waiting list for what is it, Section 8.
Well, that's fine. We've got 40,000. We really do. It's not the same waiting for Section
You
8.
have 40,000 families?
Mhm.
40,000 families? I didn't know the
See, Lexington has a huge amount of poverty, and people don't see it. These are some of the issues we've been dealing with, but they take it on in Louisville. I have to give Fisher and other folks, they started the housing first. When we talk about real homeless, there's a difference in homelessness. Every homeless is not all the same. You got your chronics who don't want to get off the streets, or who are dealing with addictions and mental illness. They're the two biggies. Of our folks, we have got 75% of the people who stay with and I'm talking about 200 plus a night if we take our housing and the community in, 75% are either, are a lot of both, addicted and mentally ill. A lot of our mentally ill, it's which came first. We're still, Eastern State, and everybody works with that. Is it addiction? Have they been self-medicating all this time?
Mm-hmm.
So people are afraid of that which is different. People feel guilty. People go by the community inn. We get volunteers constantly. I think plenty of people work with homeless. I don't think there's I think you're right. People don't know how to. I think
Do they give donations? A lot of donations?
Yeah. That's how we do
That's
what
what I
we do.
mean. There's no way not to give,
Mhm.
to do a donation wrong. But it's the interface.
And that's important. You're so right. Even on our website, we say, here's a little thing to look at. Don't give people money when they ask you for it. Don't carry around granola bars, because a lot of them don't have teeth. But carry around crackers so they can eat crackers. Take them to have lunch. All the things. I'm not saying this is the only way. I'm saying it's what we believe very strongly, knowing our folks. And knowing what helps them is for somebody to first look them in the eye and recognize them.
Yeah.
And secondly, not be afraid.
Right.
And that's hard. It's difficult for people who have in their, A plus B equals C, or you do this, this, and this, and you get there. Because they want to blame. If we can't blame those people for being where they are, that means there's something the matter with us.
Yeah.
And that is a key problem, whether it be the minimum wage, whether it be affordable housing. In Lexington, these are our big struggles. I do take my hat off to Louisville for a lot of these efforts that you all have pushed and are making people aware. Because all these are factors of society. But I just think fear, guilt, those good old Catholic guilt we use all the time on people to try to get them to do things. But I do think that a lot of it is guilt.
Can I break in here?
Yeah.
I'm actually going to take another approach, maybe. A lot of it is lack of knowledge, too. Just simply, there's so many people in Bardstown, we don't have homeless.
Yeah, that's a good.
And
yeah.
they are completely sincere.
Mhm.
They think, we don't have any homeless here. That's something that happens in the big cities.
That's right.
Because they don't see somebody sleeping in a cardboard box on the sidewalk. And the reason they don't see people sleeping in a cardboard box on the sidewalk is because the sheriff takes them to Louisville.
Or brings them to Lexington.
Or brings them to
Yeah,
Lexington.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, and then too, personally, it's kind of, I like metaphors. I teach with metaphors. It's the frog in the pot.
Oh, yeah.
If you're going to boil a frog, you start with cold water. And you warm it up. Gradually. When I was a software engineer, I made decent cash. And as a software engineer by vocation and a pastor by avocation, it pained me when I was talking with someone and they said, I just got a 25-cent an hour raise. And I didn't know if I should be happy for them or angry with them. Because that was completely outside of my reference frame. Now, I actually know what that means now. But then I didn't know, because I was the frog in the pot. I had tripled my salary from when I'd started. Didn't have any extra savings, but you know, because software and accounting, not really the same thing. So you just had shinier stuff. And I think the problem for so many folks in Bardstown, very sincere people, is they simply don't know.
That's the awareness.
There's
That you gotta work
a
on.
complete lack of awareness.
How many people are doubled up who don't go to, I
They
mean,
can count.
can't even count those.
No, in fact, you know, I know for the K count doesn't even touch Nelson County. There's nobody counting in
No
Nelson County.
no stats.
There's no stats on that.
There's gotta be something, did y'all get HUD money, but I'll go look and see what it is. The honest, funniest thing I ever did was about 5 years ago, go to Georgetown to talk to a bunch of faith community that wanted to start to do something about homeless.
And you know what they told me? I said, I looked on our K count, which was at that point US data in Louisville, and said, it shows Scott County has one homeless. So when I came in to talk to him, I said, it shows one homeless. I think we can take care of that person pretty easily, don't you all? You know, let's get them a place to live. And they all knew who he was. Yeah, he lives down at the Ice House, and he's the only one anybody knows. So they count when they're asked, they say one. But HUD will tell you it's 4 times whatever you count, that you don't catch those couch hoppers, as we call them, or those people who are living at the grace of someone else who could be put out at any minute, and particularly families that are like that. So, you know, we say 1,728 or something was our official count in January in Lexington when we went around finding people. And then all the ones in shelters added, you know, that ended up at 1,700 and whatever. Well, it's really 4 times that, easily, because we don't know the women. And we don't know the people that are living under conditions just to have a place to live. Some of our women will tell their stories, and when they do, it breaks your heart. They know they can come and tell us, and you know we don't hear from all of them, but those who do, we started our St. Anne's house 10 years ago due to one of the women coming and telling us her story and saying, you know, after they use up my disability, because she's mentally ill, after my disability is gone, I used to get a $10 credit a day, and I'm going to be real blunt here, sisters, you know, everybody. I would get $10 a day for giving him a blowjob. Now I only get 5 a day, and he makes me do it to somebody else too. This is a mentally ill woman. And this is how people are taken advantage of behind closed doors that don't even count. So we started the St. Anne's house with that, but I mean, we don't take all of them. There are plenty more out there, just like, you know, but that's the reality. The reality is the suffering for the folks, and you know, that they're always in a position of being taken advantage. Well, I'm going to have to defer let both of you deal with it. Since I'm not a direct caregiver, it says, so this question is for you both. How do you deal with being let down by a client in whom you've invested so much time and attention?
Okay, well, I've got stories about that. Right before Christmas, this past Christmas, I had a family that I had invested 208 days in. And one of our rules at Bethany Haven is 0 tolerance for drugs and alcohol. Well, I was away visiting my in-laws, and I got the call from the caretaker, so-and-so is intoxicated. And it's all over the video cameras. Because we have security cameras in our common areas for safety's sake. And so I reviewed the footage, and it was very, very plain. It was almost, if it wasn't so tragic, it would have been comical. Literally falling down on the floor and messing with this microwave and then that microwave and picking the bucket out of the closet that we used to mop with, and what are you doing with the bucket? And it was, if it weren't so tragic, it would be comical. And so I said, called this person, they were out of town visiting. Well, this because it was before Christmas, and I said, you gotta go.
Is this a family?
It was a family of four. And so they came in the next day, and I said, well, let's watch the footage. Because I got the arguments like, oh, no, it's just blah, 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 prescription medicine. No, it's not. No, it is. No, it's not. I've seen the footage. So the next day they say, oh, okay, that's enough. No, it's not. Let's keep watching. And so I had to put them out. Because how do I deal with that? Well, I have to protect the rest of the house. And we have a gas stove. I said, what if you turn the stove on? What if you set something on fire? I have to protect the rest of the house. So whenever I have to put someone out, and unfortunately I have to evict about 25% of the residents that come in for blatant rule ignorance or just complete disregard for the safety of the rest of the house. Because I tell everybody who comes in, I say, listen, when you come in this house, you come under my protection. And I take that very, very seriously. Sometimes I have to protect residents from other residents. And I grieve for a day over that. Mm-hmm. I'm broken for a day.
Have you ever regretted it?
Well,
Would you ever consider changing the policy and giving them?
Because of the transitional nature of the house. Mm-hmm. Now, we're hoping to expand to emergency shelter as well. Yeah. Right now, we have 7 bedrooms for the whole county. Yeah. We desperately need an emergency shelter in Nelson County. And fortunately, we've had some meetings with the mayor, and we're really hoping that by the end of 2015, we'll have at least made a start on the actual building where we can take an emergency shelter. Now, in that case, you've got some more leeway. I think there's definitely room for a rehab facility. We're not medical. So how do I deal with it? Well, I can't dwell on the ones that choose to fail. And like I said, right up front with people when they come in and say, listen, this is not a rehab house. We can't do that. There are great rehabs I can refer you to. Mm-hmm. This is not it. Yeah. We can't do that. And I had invested 208 days in this family, so it wasn't like they hadn't gone for 208 days. Yeah. Clean. So they made a choice.
What do you do when you send them out? Do you make a connection to some other place? Do you just say bye?
I can give them some phone numbers. That's it.
That's it.